Good evening. I'd like to call the April 2nd, 2014 City of Imperial Beach City Council meeting to order. Councilmember Bragg.
Here.
Councilmember Spriggs.
Here.
Councilmember Bilbray.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Patton and Mayor Janney are absent. In the absence of the Mayor and Mayor Pro Tempore, I, the City Clerk, called the City Council meeting to order, and the council members who are present will elect a temporary presiding officer who will serve until the arrival of the Mayor or Mayor Pro Tempore or until adjournment. Would someone like to make a motion for a temporary presiding officer?
I'd like to motion that Councilmember Bragg, who has the most experience in playing this role on the council, be put into the hot seat tonight.
I'll second that.
Okay, I have a motion and second to have Councilmember Bragg as the temporary presiding officer for this evening. Do you mind if we have oral votes for tonight? Okay. May we all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried unanimously by those present. Mayor Pro Tem Patton and Mayor Janney are absent.
Oh, shit.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I do want to, I was going to ask our City Clerk, just as a housekeeping item, that if we were to vote on anything tonight, it does need to be a unanimous vote because there's only 3 of us present.
Correct.
Correct? Okay,
Correct.
Thank you. Would you all please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. From my colleagues, are there any agenda changes or any items anyone would like to pull? Mr. Bilbray?
Yeah, I'd like to go ahead and pull 5.3 off the agenda item completely. I believe that we should have all council members here when we're talking about a rate increase.
Okay, 5.3 is
5.2.
correction to 5.2. Okay.
My agenda pack is a little different today.
Okay.
Motion to strike.
Okay. Do I need a second on that? Okay. A second?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor then please vote on striking 5.2 from our agenda so that all council members may be present. Madam Clerk, could we carry this to our next regularly scheduled meeting?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All in favor, please vote.
Aye.
Aye. Patrick? Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't hear you.
Motion carried unanimously by those present.
Thank you. So we will pull item 5.2. I would like to pull item 2.4 for the consent from the consent calendar. And the reason why, Mr. Hall, is that to me it's such an important issue. I would like to hear the staff report that goes along with it, and so that members of our audience can hear it as well. Okay? Do I need a motion on that?
No, but I should let you know that Chris is not here tonight. He's on vacation this week.
Okay.
But we can give you an overview, or we could have him come back to your next meeting and provide you a very detailed analysis of what happens during Environmental Month, if you'd like.
Perhaps you could just bring it forward for us.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Spriggs?
I was thinking also that we might pull 2.5, which has to do with the audit update, as the report has now been provided to the City Council. But I'll defer to my colleagues if you want to, because we did have a discussion about the audit at our last meeting, and where we didn't have the report in time. So I think it might be worth pulling it just so that we have an opportunity to discuss the report that we didn't see previously.
Okay, and I do believe our report that we had was a draft. Was that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So, Mr. Holland, if we could take item 2.5 at the end,
Yes.
as is our policy? Thank you. So then, colleagues, we are voting on our consent calendar items 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3, 2.4, and 2.5. We will hear at the end. I have a motion to accept the consent
Oh,
calendar?
Madam Chair,
Okay.
A second.
Motion and
we
a
have
second.
public comments.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
She's
don't
just
have those.
on the agenda changes.
Oh, okay.
The agenda change.
Sorry about that. That's
Okay.
correct. You're correct.
Okay. All in favor then of the consent calendar as stated?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carried unanimously by those present.
Okay. Mayor and council reimbursement, disclosure, community announcements. I have nothing at this time. Mr. Spriggs?
Same here. Nothing at this time. Thank you.
Okay, and we do have, you say, a couple of public comment. Thank you. Mr. Hall, I'll get to you next under communications from city staff, okay?
No worries.
Thank you. First person requesting to speak under public comment, I would like to remind you all that you have 3 minutes, is Marcus Boyd. Okay, for the record then, Michael Ramirez has donated his time to Marcus Boyd. Mr. Boyd, that would give you 6 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I don't think I'll take that much time,
Okay.
but I do appreciate that. Good evening, council, not mayor, I guess, official in charge temporarily, and city staff. It's nice to be here, and it's nice to be in good health. And wish the other two members were here, but I think we have a couple that are up for election, so maybe this will be of some significance. My name is Marcus Boyd at 1233 Palm Avenue. I've been a business owner for about 12 years, and I am interested and active in the medical marijuana debate, and would like to see safe access come to Imperial Beach. I recently spoke with Sergeant Magana while he was investigating a complaint filed by Ismael Ortiz, a legitimate cannabis, medical cannabis patient. And I thank Deputy Magana for his restraint as he heard my passionate plea for safe access for such legitimate patients. And, you know, I appreciate his understanding. You know, even though the depth of my passion did appear to try his patient restraint. During our conversation, the deputy explained that the training local deputies receive is to tell legitimate cannabis patients that they can only carry cannabis from a dispensary to their home. Otherwise, they may be cited or arrested. My concern with this training is the interpretation of transportation of cannabis. I'd like to provide you with a copy of Assembly Bill 721, which went into effect at the end of last year, and it defines transportation as applying only to cases with an intent to sell, and does not affect patients who possess cannabis under Prop 215 for medicinal use only. Ladies and gentlemen, the patients that come to me for help pay me nothing. I choose to advocate for them because I can't turn my back on them or the discrimination that they're facing, and I can't understand how you can. I will continue to bring you patient after patient and share their stories with you until there is a change. I will take these opportunities to provide you with current case law regarding Proposition 215 and Senate Bill 420. Please, I respectfully request that you request for the deputies their training to be updated, and for more compassionate understanding of how the cannabis law works and is defined in California. I'm not promoting the legalization or broad use of cannabis. I am simply requesting Imperial Beach regulate responsible medicinal cannabis access and equal patient rights in Imperial Beach. How many sick and dying patients must you see before you take action? I will continue to bring them to you. Carlos Barraza, Hispanic, 24 years old. Michael Ramirez, Hispanic, 24 years old. Mel Chavez, Hispanic, 23 years old. All cited for possession of less than 1 ounce of cannabis. All cases were thrown out in a traffic court. Ismael Ortiz, Hispanic, 21 years old. with an obvious serious injury to his right hand was arrested and jailed for concentrated cannabis, paid $300 bail, and then no charges were filed. And the district attorney released all of his property after he filed a complaint with the sheriffs. Johan Gutierrez, Hispanic, 22 years old, arrested for concentrated cannabis with a bald head cancer patient. I paid $300 for his bail. His charges were dropped by the district attorney in court this morning. Now, I do have 2 more minutes, and I would just like to take 10 seconds to think about how it must feel rather, to sit in prison or jail for concentrated cannabis to relieve pain and suffering from the 3rd chemo treatment, how it must feel to sit in jail for your medicine. For just 10 seconds, just think about that, please.
Mr. Boyd, I think I have fulfilled your request for the 10-second reprieve of just thinking about it. So, thank you. Communications from city staff. City Manager Hall, do you have anything?
I do not, Madam Chair.
Okay. We have on our agenda no presentations, so we will move on. If you'll all just bear with me, I'm not as smooth as Mayor Janney is at this, but it's kind of fun to get to do it every now and again. We do have a revision to page 1 of the March 5th, 2014 minutes was submitted as last-minute agenda information. You all have a copy of that at your setting. Okay, we did all that. Moving on to items. Let's see, we pulled. Lost track of my. Hang on a sec. We pulled 5.2, didn't we?
2.4 and 2.5.
Okay. I've got 2 agendas up here, so bear with me. 5.2.
I think our next action would be the approval of the consent calendar 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3, Madam Chair.
We did that.
We took a motion to change the
Okay.
agenda. Sorry about that.
All right.
That's a little confusing, but
Okay, then I would entertain a motion to approve consent calendar items 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Motion carried unanimously by those present.
Okay, thank you. Where's my agenda? Next item on our agenda to address then would be item 5.4. Mr. Hall?
again, Madam Chair, sorry about the confusion on tonight's agenda. 5.3 would be our next item, which is the consideration of Resolution 2014-7469, which is partial relinquishment of Highway 75, and the Assistant City Manager is prepared to discuss that with you. It also has, there's been some last-minute requests on that, and he'll walk you through that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Hall, members of the City Council. I wanted to first start off by saying we are not going to ask for your consideration and adoption of the resolution that was drafted for this item, Resolution 2014-7469, which would have accepted a partial relinquishment for a portion of the Palm Avenue State Route 75 right-of-way. The reason being that at this point in discussion with Caltrans, who had a meeting just this week about the process to do this, because the exhibit that would have accompanied that resolution was not finalized and prepared, they wanted to wait until that had happened. But what I did want to show you was that area. You may recall that as part of the proposed breakwater project at 9th and Palm, there was the implementation of a portion of the Palm Avenue Commercial Corridor Master Plan Study, wherein this right-of-way would be reconfigured. This is Palm Avenue coming along the north of the property. This is the property, 9th Street. And the property, let me see if I can make this a little bigger. You may recall that there was a partial relinquishment of this gray shaded area to allow for the reconfiguration of this intersection. As you know, today, Palm Avenue, there's a little bit of it that goes eastbound through an island median here. And the idea is to close that off and make a right turn onto Palm here, reconfigure the right-of-way to allow a more smooth left turn transition into westbound Palm Avenue, and create, as part of the project, a sidewalk along this frontage, which today does not exist, and an area here, a landscaped area for stormwater detention. As I mentioned, this area here in the gray shaded and crosshatched area was the subject of a partial relinquishment that was approved by the City Council, or accepted by the City Council some time ago, and that was effectuated in June, I believe June of 2011 by Caltrans. This area that is the subject of the resolution, which we hope to bring back to you at a future council meeting, you can see in the kind of the green shaded area here, and I'll zoom in a little bit again, was always anticipated. However, the plans hadn't been drawn at that point, and an encroachment permit will be required from Caltrans, as today there is no sidewalk. It's just a curb and a drop off to the parking lot that exists, or that did exist. There's quite a grade change here. We are interested in accepting that partial relinquishment. We would recommend that when it does come forward, the council accept the relinquishment. But as I mentioned, we are still working through, having just received the Department of Finance approval on the agreement with Sudbury for the project. We're now full steam ahead working with Caltrans. We've had a meeting already with them to design the offsite improvements. The consultant represented by Greg Shields and Project Design Consultants is with us tonight, and they're actually preparing those documents to submit to Caltrans for an encroachment permit. And as I mentioned, Caltrans was not interested, or would rather we wait until the exhibit was finalized before we brought forward the resolution. In the interest of getting things done quickly, we wanted to schedule this in the hopes that we could have it accepted and that we could prepare the exhibit later. We don't think we're losing any time at this point, but I wanted to advise the council that this partial relinquishment would be coming forward. Wanted also to take the opportunity, because we are discussing a partial relinquishment, which is just a small sliver of State Route 75, the concept of a relinquishment of the entire Palm Avenue Commercial Corridor roadway. You may recall that during as far back as the vision plan in 2000, the big picture, the idea of a full relinquishment to effectuate some of the enhancements or improvements to Palm Avenue State Route 75 was discussed, namely to provide for more safer pedestrian movements, better crossing north to south across the roadway, to give the city the ability to respond to citizen input, to make changes to the roadway, to implement signalization changes, essentially to have control of the roadway. The idea of a relinquishment had been discussed. More recently, we've just been given a grant from SANDAG to take the master plan study that proposes some significant improvements to the roadway to achieve some of those objectives, namely some traffic calming, while still providing for the appropriate levels of service to get traffic through on that state route, what is currently a state highway, but also provide pedestrian improvements, provide improvements that would be more conducive to commercial retail development along the corridor. And let me see here. That's not the one I wanted to pull up. That looks ominous, doesn't it? So if you can, just to reacclimate us to the Palm Master Plan, this is the corridor. The commercial zone here starts just east of Georgia Street. Here's 13th, And we had four sectors: the East End Gateway, the Midtown sector, the Park sector where there's that large median, and the West End Gateway. So we're taking, Sandag has given us a grant, a Smart Growth Incentive Program grant, and Project Design Consultants is the lead consultant on that effort as well. Also with MIG, who was the lead consultant preparing the original master plan study. So we have some continuity of service and expertise with this next phase. They're taking the study elements, and I'll show you some of them as we move forward, looking at taking, this is 13th looking west, creating pedestrian bulb outs, calming traffic, adding some additional landscaping. That's the East End area. Looking at it at plan view, adding improvements on the side, maintaining parallel parking along the curb. And then in the Midtown sector, this is one of our more ambitious objectives, is to create a local access lane where you would have a side median, still have 2 lanes of traffic in each direction, east and west, for faster moving traffic, but create this local access lane that would be shared with bicycles and vehicles to create a more pedestrian friendly atmosphere on the sidewalk, slower traffic for the businesses, so it would be more conducive to commercial retail and potentially mixed-use development. So you see in plan view, you have the 2 lanes of traffic moving east and west, a shared vehicle bicycle lane with parallel parking, added landscaping in those medians. That's part of the Midtown sector. There's some practical examples of this in the state. This is Octavia Boulevard in San Francisco, where the former 101, State Highway 101, was located. Was planned as a local access lane. Here you see two lanes moving east-west, and the local access median and a shared vehicle bicycle lane. This has quite a bit more traffic than our State Route 75 does today, and they were able to implement that configuration. And here's another picture of that. There's another example in Cathedral City of a local access lane with 2 lanes of traffic on a state highway. The next sector is the Park sector, where the breakwater project would be located. This is that area that would close this small through area of Palm Avenue, create as I mentioned, a landscape garden, storm drain, sort of drainage area, demonstration garden, and add sidewalk, obviously, to that frontage to make it more pedestrian friendly. And then this is in plan view. Sorry, let me go back. So you can see the Palm Avenue going east through here today. Kind of an interesting intersection where you actually have a contra flow lane where you can turn left here today. And closing that off, creating a more animated and attractive entrance to the shopping center, and reconfiguring this right-of-way. And as I mentioned, to effectuate this proposal, we already did a partial relinquishment of this section of the right-of-way and accepted it from Caltrans. And this just shows that in plan view, or in section rather. And then at the the west end, looking eastbound, where you only have 2 lanes of traffic in each direction today, maintaining that and adding a bike lane on the side, a Class 2 bike facility. And looking in plan view, there you have it. I show you that just to reintroduce yourself to the council, to the project. And what we were hoping to do, although maybe this might be an item that you'd want some input from your colleagues on, but the idea of a full relinquishment, as you can see, there's some rather ambitious proposals within a state route highway, namely the local access lane, the multi-way boulevard as it's called. And we met with Caltrans this morning to initiate discussions with them about this proposal. They are going to be reviewing it and providing comments. And we've already, based on conversations with Caltrans, their staff is very interested in relinquishing this right-of-way to the city. They're interested also in relinquishing other elements of roadways throughout District 11, San Diego County. And because of the meetings we've had with staff, staff initiated a request for Caltrans to study this roadway. And so we initiated that by sending a letter. There's no commitment on the staff or the city to initiate that analysis, and they're performing what's called a transportation systems analysis evaluation report, wherein they will look at the roadway, assess it for against its standards, where it's deficient in those standards, and prepare a report that they'll submit to us. As of today, we have learned that the first step of that, which is a route evaluation report that the planning staff does, has been completed and is on the desk for the Director of Planning to review, edit, and then will be distributing to us from a planning perspective, giving their evaluation of the roadway. Again, this doesn't commit the city to anything. It's just a report where they evaluate it. The next step would be to, once they evaluate it, do a cost estimate of what it would take to bring the roadway to current standards. And there's various different ways they can handle the relinquishment process, but one of the most expeditious ways is to negotiate an agreed upon value of those improvements with the local agency, the city, and then essentially write a check for that amount, give it to the city, and then the city would accept the roadway. As I mentioned, there are benefits to the city. The city would then have control of the roadway, the ability to operate without the state requirements, provide improvements to that roadway, signalization changes, the kinds of things you've seen in the presentation. And again, those are concepts that we will develop more fully. Of course, the downside is we would then assume all maintenance responsibility for that roadway. So that's an unknown, but what the evaluation process is intended to do is to identify where those deficiencies might rest and how much it would take to upgrade those facilities. So there is obviously two sides of this discussion, and what we were hoping to do is get your input as to the interest level in continuing on with this process, keeping in mind that as we move along, more information will be made available. So, but if there's just absolutely no interest, we may want to make that known to Caltrans. But at this point, there's no harm in having them perform the analysis. As I said, they're very willing to relinquish the right-of-way to the city if the city would like to accept it. So at this point, we're seeking input from the council on the general discussion of an entire relinquishment of the roadway from the boundary at San Diego to the boundary at Coronado. We do have projects that are proposed along the roadway. There's a new project currently being discussed, potentially for the old El Camino Hotel site. Already every project has to go through Caltrans on that roadway, and their standards can be at times a challenge, to say the least, to work through. So there are, as I said, some benefits to considering this, and the cost to maintain the roadway ultimately would be the one unknown but consideration that the council would have to consider.
Thank you, Mr. Wade. As always, your report is very detailed. Colleagues, do you have any questions on this? Mr. Spriggs, would you like to lead off?
Madam Chair, I do have, maybe it's a good point to add at this stage, is that the City of San Diego has also received a grant to look at their portion of Highway 75. So I think it's going to be a really good time to work with them, work in tandem, and see what we can do all the way from the freeway all the way through the community. So it's a good time to be looking at these kind of issues.
That's a good point. The study was funded by a Caltrans community-based transportation planning grant. We took a lot of community input to develop these concepts, and that same grant was just awarded to the city in the amount of $150,000 to study that segment between our city and I-5. So hopefully, and we will be engaged in that to have some continuity and some cohesion there.
Thank you, Mr. Spriggs. If I could just comment that is something that historically has been didn't happen, and there was a very distinct mark of when you were leaving the city of San Diego and entering into the city of Imperial Beach. It was such a stark difference, and for many years people who've lived here a long time, you can remember those battles that we fought with the city of San Diego, even just as, you know, getting them to put in landscaping and take care of the landscaping. And they finally did put up a fence. But this has been years that we have been asking for partnership with the city of San Diego. So, Mr. Wade, like you said, if we can start to have some kind of cohesiveness on Highway 75 and Palm Avenue, that would be incredible. This is really good news. Mr. Spriggs, would you like to continue?
Sure, I'd like to get started. Thanks. So I assume San Diego has already had their section relinquished to them some time ago?
No, that's still a state route highway.
I see. So for some reason they don't find it valuable for them to have control over State 75 in the San Diego portion. And I guess the whole idea of the pros and cons, I'm pretty sure we're going to not defer, recommend that you gather more information about this so the full council can look at it, as long as it doesn't morally or financially obligate us to move forward. If Caltrans does all the work to do the analysis, that would then enable us to be more knowledgeable about the costs of moving ahead.
Yes, I think that would be the prudent step to take, is just to gather as much information, particularly as it doesn't commit us to anything. A comment about the city of San Diego and their section of the roadway, they're just initiating the community-based the planning process to look at the roadway, come up and develop recommendations for that roadway. My guess is, and which is the same way we started, and during that discussion and even working with Caltrans, because it was a Caltrans grant, to come up with these concepts, we knew pretty early on that some of what we were recommending would be a challenge to get through Caltrans based on their standards. The simple addition of a bulb out to make a pedestrian crossing less of a distance across that roadway, some of that just doesn't meet the standards for their standards as applied to a 40-mile-an-hour roadway. So based on what we've recommended in the study and taking it further into now design development, it's becoming more and more apparent that if we want to, and if it's the council's desire and the community's desire to implement these proposals, the best likelihood for that happening is a relinquished roadway. My guess is, depending upon what City of San Diego comes up with, they may too find themselves in a position to request a relinquishment, but that's just a guess. The Caltrans is currently identifying segments of roadway that they would like to relinquish, creating a priority list. We happen to be at the top of that list right now by virtue of having expressed an interest and asked them to study the roadway for that possibility. No other city in the county has made that request at this point, but because the city of San Diego is now actively studying a state highway to recommend improvements, that could be a follow-on step.
So I guess that sort of begs the question to me, why would Caltrans want to relinquish? And we need to really understand, I think, what the economics of this is, so that we know we're not just getting a series of maintenance challenges that they see coming up on the horizon. It's kind of like when you're buying a used car, you really want to get the facts on the car, so the Carfax. In this case, it's the road facts, I guess. Related to that is, it's still going to be a state highway. Whether we're responsible for it or not, it's still going to be SR 75. And surely there will be some influence or oversight or control that Caltrans would have. I'm not sure how much autonomy we would have. I mean, a state highway you would think would have to meet certain requirements as a thoroughfare. it'd be good to know what those what those residual requirements might be, if any, as part of the next round of discussions when you come back with more information.
And we can do that. I would, just to clarify, if a relinquishment is processed and accepted by the city, it would not be a state highway. At least the section between the city of San Diego and Coronado would no longer be a state highway. However, as long as the segments between our city and I-5 and/or our city within Coronado were state highway, Caltrans would have some input as to what impacts whatever we do in our roadway might have on their segments. They wouldn't have any specific, well, within reason, they wouldn't have any specific regulations that would apply to our section of the roadway, but the way it might impact theirs. For example, if we were decreasing lane widths at the east end of the highway, and they'd want to see how they're going to transition into their segment of the roadway. So they would have comments as to whether or not and how what we're doing impacts their section of the roadway. So it's important, as you just mentioned, to work with San Diego during their design and planning process to see where they may fall in terms of recommending a relinquishment. Because certainly it would be easier to effectuate a comprehensive design that seamlessly blended into one another if the whole segment between I-5 and Coronado were relinquished. So you're correct in one sense that Caltrans would still, as long as there's some segment of roadway we're tying into that is their jurisdiction, they would have some input and some purview. However, when we wanted to implement, for example, bulb outs at intersections or rephasing the traffic signals within our roadway, if it were relinquished, that would be our call. We would not be applying state highway standards.
I think I would be probably very interested in hearing what Caltrans and maybe even the Navy would think about reducing the speed limit, reducing the through lanes from 3 on each side to 2 on each side, that sort of thing, because that is part of the access to North Island. Even though we think the bridge is the main access, this is a backup. I would think that strategically there'd be an interest there. I mean, if something were to happen to the bridge and it can get clogged up completely with just one traffic accident, then they're boxed in. So this, I just can't believe that there's not going to be a continuing state and federal interest in that may conflict with our plans to make this a much more pedestrian-friendly, commercial-friendly, easily traversed, all the things that we want to do, that we would like to do, that we've seen in some of the preliminary planning and thinking that you just shown, as a matter of fact, are things that could make that thoroughfare less useful as a strategic exit or entry point to the Navy base. So I just want to make sure we're aware of all of those nuances and all of those potential influences that may come to bear on our planning and our assumptions. If we go ahead and do this and assume this expense, we think we can do what we want with the roadway, we may be in for some surprise. I just want to make sure we don't get surprised. That's really all I've got.
Thank you, Mr. Spiggs. Mr. Bilroy, did you have any comments on this?
As I don't feel comfortable, I think none of us really feel too comfortable about taking over SR 75. I think it is important that we at least have due diligence and look at the potential cost for if in the future this council does feel like we need to do it, but most importantly for future councils, 5-10 years down the road, they need to at least have some idea of what the cost of taking over that stretch of freeway is gonna be, and if the city can actually cover it.
Good point. Thank you. Mr. Wade, can you speak to that a little bit? I think you had laid out 2 steps that we were going to go through, and step 2 would be bringing the roadway to current standards. And then the way I understood it, then that Caltrans would cut a check to the city of Imperial Beach to make those recommendations and bring it to standards. My other question is, I have a couple more. If we were to do an analysis of that section, and then Caltrans would do an analysis of that section, would they be the same, or are we looking at things differently than they would? You know, I don't know if you even know the answer to that, but if you could kind of talk a little bit more about the 2 steps that you spoke to us about. Then also, I just wanted to make sure that you said if it is relinquished, then certain projects coming forward would not have to get Caltrans approval. Is that correct? Like, you know, the El Camino, Bernardo Shores.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, if there was a relinquished roadway and those projects came in subsequent to the relinquishment, there would be no encroachment permit process through Caltrans.
Okay.
And that process can be lengthy, and oftentimes is.
It can be lengthy.
Yes. We just, as a matter of fact, a proposed applicant had input from Caltrans just early on the roadway, and this is on a segment where you may recall they just increased the speed limit from 40 to 45 miles an hour. That authority, by the way, would rest with the city council in a relinquishment scenario, not with Caltrans. Because of that increase in traffic speed, they will not allow on-street parking in front of the retail. They just don't view it. It's an engineering decision, an engineering opinion that they won't allow on-street parking, which sort of conflicts with our overall objective, which is to create a commercial retail district along Palm Avenue. The 2-step process, and getting to your question about how we might evaluate it versus how they may, I guess the good news is because Caltrans and state highway standards are for the most part fairly restrictive, they would be evaluating it based on their regulations to see where it's deficient. And once they prepare that report, we would be given the opportunity, as I understand it, to review it and make our own comments as to whether or not we believe they've identified everything in the report that requires an upgrade or meeting current standards. So that process would be a sort of I don't know if it's a negotiated process, but a review process of the report and evaluation they perform, and I would imagine the city staff, Public Works Department, our city engineer would be involved in that to make sure that their evaluation meets with our approval in terms of what we think needs to be done, which I would imagine would include both surface and subsurface improvements, because we do know in some cases that some of the subsurface infrastructure is deteriorating. The 2-step process is that there would be one of the ways in which meeting current standards can be. There's several options once the analysis is performed, and assuming the city wants to move forward as to how the local agency can accept the roadway or the upgrade of the improvements. One is for them to create a capital project and actually do the work. More often than not, what you find is this financial contribution only component where it's a monetary funding of the listed improvements, and that is a negotiated amount. So much in the same way that we evaluate the list of improvements they've identified, we would also have a say in what we think would be a reasonable cost to provide or prepare those improvements. So it's a process of negotiation, discussion, review that we would go through with Caltrans. That would be the second step in the process to do that and arrive at a fair decision as to what that financial contribution might be, subject to the council's approval, I would imagine, because the council would have to accept ultimately the relinquishment if that's what would happen. The Caltrans has provided some information, or quite a bit of information, and one of the things they did provide in that information was an analysis. We do have a maintenance agreement with them to provide some of the maintenance. although I think it's a low estimate, and maybe it's low because they haven't done a lot of improvement to the roadway, and some of the, although they, from time to time they do provide some improvements, they've estimated over the a 4-year ongoing maintenance cost to this roadway of $31,500 a year. Now, I think we may scoff at that in general terms, because that doesn't evaluate or contemplate bringing the sidewalks all up to ADA standards, putting in sidewalks where there are no sidewalks, those kinds of things. But that's the estimate they provided, and that also doesn't take into account, as I mentioned, subsurface improvements. So there's a long way to go, as Councilmember Spriggs mentioned. We plan to bring that information forward as we get it. We'll be back before you on the next meeting. Part of our Sandag project, the grant-funded project, is to update the council regularly. I can announce right now, and I'll be doing it again on the 16th, that we're going to have our first community workshop on April 29th at 6:30 in the community room. There's quite an active engagement process that we'll be going through, and the Navy will be involved as well. Caltrans will be involved as well. And the resource agencies will be involved. So quite a bit of community outreach that we plan for the project. We already have a web page dedicated to the project that will be updated frequently, and it's going to be an interesting process, if only just to figure out what the roadway looks like in terms of deficiencies. So we hope to bring that forward as soon as we can, and we also hope to have Caltrans' initial comments on what we submitted to them today for the improvements, proposed improvements, by the workshop on the 29th.
Okay, that's knowing Caltrans, that's an ambitious schedule. Colleagues, we've heard our report. Mr. Wade, I think you've heard council discussion. I think it's unanimous that we move forward cautiously. We've got our reservations. Let's see what they bring back, with the transportation system analysis evaluation report. Colleagues, would you like to provide any further direction? Or I think Mr. Spriggs brought up a good one. Obviously, the Navy is a must, moving forward. It's going to be interesting to see what comes back, that's for sure. And then, Mr. Wade, you had, I think, a critical point, was discussions that the city of San Diego is going to be having, their community planning, the process that we went through as well, because their stretch of road is, yes, it's Highway 75, Palm Avenue, but it's very different than our section. Their blocks are longer. It's just, there's gaps in, there's some infill that could happen there. Of course, this doesn't speak to that, but so it could be, we need to be, I think, at those meetings as well, keeping an eye on what their discussions are. I think that was a great point. Do you believe you have enough direction from us now to go forward, Mr. Hall? Comfortable? You heard the discussion? Okay. Mr. Wade, thank you for the report. We are moving on to item 5.4, a policy discussion of proposed revisions to the Imperial Beach sign code related to digital signs.
Madam Chair and council members, this item first came to you in February of 2013, so it's been a little bit over a year. And so we've been working on some potential solutions to this. Now, it's my understanding, having not been in that meeting, that there was not necessarily a consensus reached on whether or not the council was supportive of electronic signs. So what we're really doing tonight is to give you a little bit of an update on some of the information we found, and then what we're suggesting, again, in lack of a full quorum, is that we go ahead and continue to put together the information and get some direction from you to go to the Chamber of Commerce, have some discussions with them and other business groups about signage and specifically electronic signage, and then bring that back to a future meeting when we have the full council here. But I'll turn some time over to Jim, and he can give you at least some background information on some of the things that we've been working on in the last year and a half or so.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. At their last meeting on this subject, which was February 20th, 2013, staff outlined in its report to the council some proposed changes to the sign code that reflected recent legal requirements, and I list those in the report. Also, towards the end of the meeting, the council was interested in additional information regarding digital signs. There was some discussion about involving the Chamber of Commerce in our sign code revisions. We did contact the Chamber of Commerce, and they requested additional time so that they could kind of survey their members to gain their input on proposed changes to the code. And advances in sign technology and the recent legal requirements have posed some issues and challenges for jurisdictions that do regulate signs. Of course, the old school version of messages on their signs, you had to do that manually. Put those letters in a cabinet and close the cabinet, and then repeat that again whenever the message were to change. Of course, nowadays with electronic technology, you could do that without having to do that manually. And in fact, some public agencies have already approved and installed digital signs. School districts, city governments, state college facilities, fire departments. Even in our region, the city of Vista has gone through the process of allowing electronic digital message boards. Carlsbad amended their sign code to allow digital signs, but just last week, when they considered a permit to install that along Interstate 5, they actually denied the permit. There were a number of neighbors in that area that protested the installation of these digital signs along the freeway, and the city council acquiesced and denied the permit. City of Santee is still considering a digital billboard for a car dealership along Highway 52. That is still in process, and they're awaiting revised sign plans from the applicant. Now, staff has reviewed some of the research on digital signs. Not all of those were of much help. The Federal Highway Administration study basically did a paper that suggested how to design a research paper on the topic, so that was of very little use. The zoning practice by APA was basically a summary of some of the things that cities were doing across the country. And they basically concluded that if you're thinking about amending your sign code to include digital signs, they're recommending things such as a minimum static display time for digital signs. Also recommending that there be a maximum brightness standards, both daylight and nighttime hours. Some of the studies specify sign heights depending on, and sign distances. If you're considering digital signs within placement of a highway corridor that has certain speed limits. Basically, a number of the studies suggested that digital signs just add to the issue of being a distraction. The traffic safety studies point that most of the accidents that you see are due to distractions along the roadway, or actually it doesn't even have to be on the roadway. The drivers are distracted either because they're operating cell phones, texting, and even those things are more of a problem than even DUI cases or speeding. And of course, one of the issues that they got into had to do with something they call a Zeiger-Naert Zeigarnik effect, where it says if you have a digital sign and the driver is anticipating that message to change, they will stare at that sign so that they can see what the next message is. Any code changes that you're thinking about with regard to allowing digital signs will need to address this issue. Some of the studies suggested some standards such as instituting maximum day and night brightness standards, and also enacting minimum static display times such as 5 to 8 seconds or even longer. Now, the City Attorney's Office in the staff report has outlined a number of options for the City Council to consider. For digital signs on private property, option 1 is to prohibit them. Option 2 is to allow with regulations, such as the minimum static display time that I mentioned, no scrolling or animation, a maximum brightness of 5,000 nits daytime and 500 nits at night, automatic controls, setbacks near residential areas, and limited to just certain types of businesses, perhaps such as large shopping centers or car dealerships. Among the options for digital signs on public property, option 1 is to prohibit those signs. Option 2, again, is to allow with regulations, but it would be limited to such things as advertising solely city-sponsored events, along with a policy that identifies messages that would be prohibited. Perhaps only allow city event messages, notices of council and board meetings, and emergency messages. Third option is to allow advertising, but with very strict controls. Options for a civic organization such as a Chamber of Commerce that would be able to control digital signs on private or public properties would be limited to, the messages would be limited to chamber events and their messages. Off-site advertising is still prohibited under our current code. Staff is recommending that you receive the report, entertain any public testimony, including any consideration you may give to what the Chamber of Commerce had requested, provide direction to staff regarding digital signs on both private property and public properties. And that concludes our presentation.
And Madam Chair, let me reiterate, we understand that not all the council is here tonight. So we certainly wouldn't be seeking direction in that there wasn't consensus on the council at an earlier date. But we did want you to at least receive the information, and we can certainly place this on a future agenda after we've had time to talk with the Chamber of Commerce, and then we can come back and get information from the full council assembled. But we certainly could take your input tonight on anything else you'd like to see us study and include in this report.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Mr. Bilbray, anything on this? Okay. Waiting till it comes back for full council review. Mr. Spriggs?
Yeah, I think we should wait till we have the full council to get up to speed on the material you presented very well tonight. Thank you very much for the presentation. I just think you might have hurried a little bit over one point you were making about the distraction point. There's a slide that has the distraction percentage of drivers on it, back around the middle of the presentation.
Right.
It's almost the Zyga mark or whatever. Yeah, here it is. This highlighted part in the lower right, where it says, and this is because you were talking about cell phone and texting and all that, but this talks about outside person, object, or event being almost 3 times more likely to be the cause of an accident, I suppose, or a distraction than anything else. And I think that that's where the point is about it ties in with the following slides on the distraction of electronic signs, waiting for them to change and that sort of thing. I do it myself. So I think this is a really valid point that we will no doubt discuss again when we have the full council here. Thanks for the presentation.
And council member, you know, all signs are intended to get your attention, even traffic safety signs, and those are important functions for that to do. And of course, static signs, they serve a function to provide identification for businesses and that such. It's when you get into digital signs that either produce video and moving images, that becomes really distractive. And although in this particular study it doesn't specify a percentage as to digital signs being the main cause of that distraction, it doesn't say that, but it's somehow subsumed into other distractions. And so when you get into the issue of distractions, you want to try to minimize that as much as possible to address traffic safety.
Thank you, Mr. Nakagawa. I have a question possibly that our safety director could answer, is that since we have started putting our mobile sign out front talking about our council meetings, I just wondered, has that caused any accidents that we're aware of, and has that been a distraction? For the record, he's shaking his head no. Thank you. I just, you know, was thinking about that, and case in point, you know, so that's good to know. Mr. Gawa, this is a great, Nakagawa, this is a great, I'm sorry? Okay, go ahead.
Sorry. The other aspect you didn't really touch on that I think is really a council policy question is potential digital visual pollution. If everybody's got signs all over the place, private property, and they're all flashing and changing and that sort of thing, I mean, just imagine Las Vegas and Imperial Beach. So I think that's something, back material on the worst case kind of scenarios and where regulation, because that's where regulation comes in, and what that might mean we should be thinking about on a policy level. That would be very helpful.
And in the staff report, the city attorney's office points out, of course, if you have a number of these bright digital signs, that becomes a distraction, but the city attorney's office suggests maybe the council may wish to limit those to certain types of businesses, perhaps shopping centers and that sort of thing.
I think all of those considerations we're going to have to consider, especially the size, the height, you know, and you know, if you were to envision Seacoast Drive, again, you know, these great big tall almost monument signs flashing and, you know, disturbing people's sleep and vision, you know, down on that is a residential area. So all of those issues are I think really need to come back to us too. And when do you, Mr. Hall, when do you envision this coming back to a full council?
I think it's going to take some time to go to the Chamber of Commerce, get some input from them. So I would guess you're probably in the May-June timeframe. It won't be at your next meeting. It'll probably be a little bit down the road.
Okay, there was something that was included in our staff report. Was that attachment 1? Was that from the Chamber of Commerce?
No, that was from a private citizen, Deborah Cook.
Okay.
She was kind of keenly interested in maybe making changes to the city's sign code. Wanted the city to kind of get away from all these banner signs that are flooding around and switch over to something like a digital message board where you could change the message every so often to announce some kind of a civic activity. And so that was a point that Deborah was trying. I don't know if she's in the audience. I guess she's not in the audience today.
She has spoken to us before, though, hasn't she? Yeah, I thought so. Do you know if the Chamber of Commerce got a copy of that as well?
The Chamber of Commerce got a copy of not only this report, but the last report of February 20th of last year. One additional thought with regard to your comment about large signs and that sort of thing. Of course, we recently made changes to our commercial zoning districts, and of course a lot of the commercial development that you see built along Highway 75 Palm Avenue today was built during the time when the motorist was uppermost in the minds of a lot of these shopping center developers. You had a parking lot in the front. The retail business was set back, and so you had a large detached freestanding sign in the front. Now, with the revisions to the code and over time, when you start to see businesses move their storefronts closer to the street, making it more pedestrian friendly through the streetscape improvements that PDC would be involved in, you could actually mount those signs up against the building without having to rely on tall freestanding signs, and still have that message conveyed to the motoring customers. So that's just one more thought.
Okay, thank you for that point, Mr. Nakagawa. So then, colleagues, we can look forward to this coming back to us May or June? Is that correct? Okay, thank you. I now believe we are going to, Mr. Spriggs, if you don't mind, we will take them in order. We will hear item 2.4 and then item 2.5. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I appreciate I think it was a good idea to pull this from the agenda and just talk about some of the events that are associated with Environmental Awareness Month. The first thing I should point out is that actually Earth Day falls during the month of April. If people don't know, it's April 22nd. I'll be coming to the council seeing if we can use that as an employee holiday so that we can go out and improve the environment. Probably won't go, so don't get too excited for all the employees out there. But yeah, it was April Fool's was yesterday. It's just a leftover joke. But the analysis section of your staff report identifies some things that will be happening during the month that I think will be great to focus on. The EDCO Environmental Times newsletter for April will focus on opportunities for Imperial Beach residents and businesses to reduce, reuse, and recycle. So watch for that in your EDCO Environmental Times newsletter that comes in your bill. The Green Business Outreach Initiative, the city, in partnership with the South Bay Energy Action Collaborative and the IB Chamber of Commerce, are planning an outreach effort to local businesses in the city to provide free education and opportunities for energy efficiency enhancements that will take place in June. The initiative includes a business energy efficiency lunch and learn workshop for municipal and chamber staff, followed by a week-long energy savings blitz for businesses to receive no-cost energy audits and improvements through SDG&E's direct install program. The Tijuana River Water Quality Improvement Program will have its consultation panel on April 24th. The city is hosting the first consultation panel for development of the Tijuana River Water Quality Improvement Plan at the Tijuana Estuary on that day, April 24th, from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. On April 26th, the city will hold its annual citywide garbage sale for garage sale. Sorry, garbage sale, garage sale. Just amazing what one letter can do to a word. Garbage sale. One man's garbage is another man's gold. Citywide garage sale for residents to sell and exchange used items. The city provides an online map and free advertisement for the residents who want to participate in that event. Someone's going to have to help me with this one, but the ILACSD annual Creek to Bay cleanup is on April 26th. The city sponsors the annual I Love a Clean San Diego Creek. Oh, that's what it is. I Love a Clean San Diego Creek to Bay cleanup as a collaborative watershed activity for the San Diego Bay. Cleanup sites will be around San Diego, including YMCA Camp Surf, Otay Valley Regional Park, Imperial Beach Pond 20, and the Silver Strand State Beach. On May 3rd, the city and EDCO will hold its annual Homefront Cleanup event at Mar Vista High School from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. Residents can drop off any item except hazardous materials free of charge, and EDCO will provide recycling for green waste, scrap metals, cardboard, mixed recyclables, and electronics. And then finally, on May 9th, the city and the South Bay Energy Action Collaborative will host an energy conservation education trailer during the farmers market to provide information to residents on home energy conservation and rebate programs. And Madam Chair, I will ask Ed to post that on our webpage so that people are aware of these activities. So you can see there's a number of activities happening during Environmental Month, so that's pretty exciting, and we'll make sure to get all those posted. But I want to get those on the record, and I appreciate you pulling that off and let us talk about it.
Thank you, Mr. Hall, and that's exactly why I did pull it off. Some of these have become such annual events, and Mr. Levine, I see you smiling over there. You know, one of my favorite events is always the home front cleanup, because I'm always amazed at the amount of how many pounds of garbage and things that we're able to get out of people's yards. So this really does improve. It's kind of a quality of life issue, but it really does improve our neighborhoods dramatically. And then since we were just talking about signs, Mr. Hall, the next time that we have our digital sign out, if we could include these dates on that as well, especially as they get closer. And one that I'm really excited about too is the road show at the farmers market. I think that's new, isn't it?
Yeah, and so is the garbage show.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yes. So thank you for and Mr. Villa, if you could follow up on that and get it out to our community. Thank you. We will now hear item 2.5, Mr. Hall.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
we need a motion to approve Resolution 2014-7467.
Thank you. I would entertain a motion to approve that. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Motion carried unanimously by those present.
Thank you. Mr. Hall, if you would.
Madam Chair, I'll turn some time over to our Administrative Services Director, Doug Bradley, as soon as he gets his microphone up and going. And I think he is prepared to provide you some of the highlights of the audit as well as our responses to some of the suggestions for improvement.
The entire city operations. So depending on what level of detail you want, I'm prepared to discuss. But in general, the audit it is just an analysis of the financial operations of the city. It's very consistent with past audits I've had at other communities. The financial standings of the city are quite impressed with, and we've talked about fund balances and putting reserves away for a rainy day, and I'm very thankful to be in an operation that takes those kind of things into consideration. The findings and concerns of the auditors are also consistent with findings and concerns I've seen in the past. All of them in this audit are solvable and can be addressed quite easily, and we've already took steps to address them. In the audit, or in the agenda packet, there's quite a bit of information. In the audit, you'll find in the beginning a management and discussion section, and that's something I prepare, and I go through the financials, and I try to summarize in layman's terms what took place during the course of the year. And so there's about a dozen pages in the management discussion and analysis that hopefully gives you the big picture. Followed by that are the financials that goes into more depth and more analysis, all reconciling and to the management discussion and analysis. Also included in the audit is the letter from the auditors to you, discussing the legalities of an audit and very generic structured language. It's not specific necessarily to Imperial B, but it's addressed to you to let you all know that this is an audit done by them, and it's signed and presented to you. But in general, that's what you see before you. And I'm here to take any questions.
Mr. Spriggs, you had asked to have this item pulled. Do you have specific questions you would like to ask or comments?
Yes, thanks. I do have, did want to get you back here with respect to the final audit report. I think my main question is a general one, and it's really a question regarding you, allowing you to make some professional judgments about whether there are any material or non-material but important findings regarding city financial processes, safeguards, vulnerabilities that you would like to provide an example of that have been presented in the audit report, and what the corrective measures are and when you think those measures will be completed. So I'm offering you an opportunity to hit some of the majors, if any, in the report, and give us a sense as to what's being done by way of corrective action.
Yeah, certainly. Within the audit, there is a section there in which the auditors describe certain processes that they find as either a weak material or significant deficiency. And so you have those before you. And it's in that letter also I describe that we've recognized those items as being a deficiency. We've outlined certain corrective actions and timelines and who's responsible for correcting those deficiencies. And in some instances, we also talk about what we've already done, because obviously we're past some of this time since this audit period, and we defined what we've already done and corrected. Specifically, they talked a little bit about, I'll just give some specifics. They talked about journal entries and how in the past, some of the staff that were analyzing and preparing certain journal entries were also the same staff that was approving the journal entries. And so auditors don't like to see that, and that doesn't follow good accounting practices because it doesn't give any oversight into a journal entry that can have significant effect on the financials of the institution. So they like to see that segregated. From day one, I implemented that. That's just not a practice that is in line with generally accepted accounting principles. So I personally know how to input a journal entry. I just don't do it. So if I have an analysis, I'll give it to one of my accountants to review and then input the journal entry, and then later I'll approve that journal entry. So we've segregated that. Another part of that finding was that the staff was not providing, in every instance, but in most, in most they were, but in some instances they were not providing backup information for their journal entries. So for example, if they found a reason to make a modification to an expense, move it from one department to another, they weren't providing, say, that backup invoice that showed what department it should have been in. And so those simple procedures I outlined and said, look, this is something we need to have here at the city, and so we've done that. A couple other areas were they had a question about how we were doing our bank reconciliations, and there was some concern that it was being reconciled to a pooled cash account rather than to a general ledger account. I know that's kind of a specific accounting phrase, but so what I've done, and in fact today's was my time, I finally had time to dive into that finding, and we resolved that finding by identifying the proper general ledger account rather than a pooled account. And now we are doing our bank reconciliations to that account and satisfying their concern there. Last council meeting, City Manager Hall had talked a little bit about the restructuring in my department, and that was also one of the findings. They were a little bit concerned about the accounting level of knowledge within the department. And so with the city, we talked about restructuring my department, and what I really saw striking when I got there was the hierarchy. It was a very vertical department. You had your department director, you had a finance supervisor, and then you had accounting clerks, and it was very vertical. It was striking to me on how I would talk to some of my accounting clerks, and they said, well, that's what they did up there. I don't know what that process was. And so it's not how I like to operate, and for such a small department, I don't think it's very effective. And so what we've done, and thankful to your approving it, is I've created 2 senior accountant level positions, and those were staff accountants, but I made them very much right to my level, and so they work with me hand in hand. When I'm analyzing whether it be the audit, I have one senior accountant that's helping me out with audit-related questions and accounting. And then on the other side, I have a senior accountant that's helping me out with the budget and forecasting and looking forward. But they are very intimate in understanding why I'm asking these questions. And then below them are my staff clerks, and I deal directly with them. It's not as if they go through the senior accountant. So my senior accountants are real analysts. And so what I've seen already is that they're more engaged and involved in all the accounting aspect. And I even, it's ironic, but the audit findings I sent to my staff. I said, look, you know, we're all as a team going to be held accountable in a year from now on whether or not we resolve these. And one of the accountants said, wow, the finance director never asked our opinion on it. And I thought that was kind of striking. So I feel by flattening out the department, we'll address that whole education or a knowledge level, because they're smart employees. They just haven't have the opportunity to get involved. So there are a few other findings. Like I said, nothing significant.
Yep. Well, this is exactly, perfectly what I had hoped to have, is us to get a better picture of you as our senior financial person, how you see the audit, how forthcoming you are about what's in it, so that I or someone else on the council doesn't have to drag you through each finding and ask for what's being done, et cetera, et cetera. So flying colors, thank you very much. You've conveyed to me certainly I feel a lot more that I understand what you're doing a lot better, and your comments about the organization and your elaboration, because previously we talked about the positions and we approved the positions, etc., as you mentioned, but now we can see functionally what that means in terms of the operation of the finance department of the city of Imperial Beach, and I really appreciate your elaborating on that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was at our last meeting, and Mr. Hall, you and I had a discussion about the audit and our findings, and the fact that you really have to embrace an audit. It's going to be a deep dive into your financials, and so you really do need to embrace it. So, Mr. Spriggs, I thank you for bringing this issue forward. You know, we always are striving for that transparency to our public, but we're also, as council members, always striving to understand it all too.
Sure.
So, Mr. Hall, thank you, and sir, thank you for your report tonight. And I think we can, put this one to bed and look forward to the one next year as well.
Well, ironically, you say that. I have them scheduled coming in May, and perhaps another level of comfort for you all. This will be my third audit in 12 months. So, because I had just finished my other before I got here. So, anyway, but thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for your report. Mr. Hall, did you want to add anything on that?
Maybe more of a general comment, and I guess I wish the mayor and Councilman Patton were here. But I think the council saw tonight on display what a great group of employees we have in this organization, and the fact that they are so well prepared and they understand the issues that are facing our community and are able to explain them in a way that you can see the picture and can see the impact it's going to have on our community. So I just think we're blessed to have Doug on board as well, and the team we're forming here is just going to be very functional and I think going to serve this community very well. And I think you saw that on display tonight. So it's fun to watch them do what they do so well.
Great, thank you. I think that's the end. Sir, Mr. Oh, thank you. Okay, I would entertain a motion then to...
I'll make the motion.
Oh, thank you.
To pass, is it 2.5?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Spriggs, would you like to second that?
Yes, I would like to second the approval of the audit report.
Okay, all in favor, please vote aye.
Aye.
Motion carried unanimously by those present.
Thank you. And then I would like to announce that our meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for attending.
Good job.
That's a big deal. Oh, yeah, mine's just there.